At first glance, though, the female contribution to the image of Georgian Britain seems slight. The architecture and art of this period look like a monument to the talents of men. Palatial houses designed and decorated by architect Robert Adam. Walls gleaming with the oils of Joshua Reynolds and Thomas Gainsborough define the age. But what I see is a landscape shaped and styled by women and blanketed with their work. From tapestry and embroidery to watercolours and miniatures to entire interiors, a world in themselves. But this was art behind closed doors. Amateur art, a word just coming into use to mean someone who practiced for love, not payment. But amateurish was not the put-down it is today. In this grand setting in rural Wales, a body of amateur work made here at Erddig Hall reveals just how imaginative 18th century women could be.
This is one of the most surprising objects I've ever seen created by a female amateur. It's literally fantastic. It's a Chinese pagoda. It's based on a fantasy idea of the East, part of chinoiserie, which was very fashionable in the 1760s and 1770s. It's made of wood on vellum, which is a kind of treated calf skin, and then it's encrusted with mica, which is a ground-up mineral, and with mother of pearl and little bits of coloured glass. But in these shivering Chinese bells, I think we can still feel the imagination of the artist.
This mix of manual dexterity, architectural knowledge, and wild fantasy would be remarkable in any provincial amateur, male or female. But even more surprisingly, the maker wasn't mistress of this house or even an accomplished daughter. She was one of the servants.
She was christened Elizabeth Ratcliffe, but known to the family as Betty the Little. She dedicated her life to the Yorks, working for them in London and here at Erddig for over 30 years. But Betty was no ordinary servant.
Betty Ratcliffe was hired by the mistress of the house, Dorothy York, and trained up to be a governess and lady's maid. But remarkably, alongside her tutorial and menial duties, and for 18th century servants these were demanding, Ratcliffe developed an aptitude for art and craft. Doubtless she inherited her eye for detail from her clockmaker father. Such sublime arty craftiness could have been seen as an absurd affectation in a servant, but for the interest of the young squire, Philip York. So Betty was painfully aware that she owed her opportunity to her master's indulgence, as this deferential letter to him demonstrates.
Chester, July the 12th, 1770. Honoured Sir, I yesterday received the honour of your letter and will, to the utmost of my power, endeavour to execute what you are pleased to request instead of command. He's commissioning her to produce these models and pictures and pieces of needlework. And in fact, we know from other letters that she fulfilled other commissions for his friends. So he seems to have fostered her artistic endeavour and been very proud of her.
And Erddig is still proud of Betty's achievements. Delicate paper cuts and artful silk flowers show off feminine accomplishment. But there's another model that demonstrates the less conventional side of Betty's artistic ambition.
This is a model of the ruins of the Temple of the Sun at Palmyra, which is in Syria. It's one of those many sites of excavations and ruins that were being rediscovered in the 18th century, setting off a new wave of neoclassicism. Her version, though, is rather feminized and romanticized because it's dripping these ruins with creepers and plants. So it's as if it's glimpsed in a romantic dream. It has a touch of the fairy tale about it. The family must have been exceedingly proud of it and of her talents because they commissioned a special cabinet from a London cabinet maker to show it off.
Why did Betty craft a Syrian temple? The answer lies in the renewed fashion for all things classical, which swept Europe from the 1760s onwards, influencing everything from architecture to wallpaper design. I'd lay money that Betty had seen the architectural plates in a best-selling book about the ruins of Palmyra. So the very latest breakthroughs in aesthetics had percolated down from the lofty realms of the male cultural elite to a servant. But surely this would rankle with everyone else in the house. A servant making temples? Has the world turned upside down?
Well, we get some sense from a rather irritated letter from his mother, Dorothy, who, after all, is tasked with running the household. This is in June 1768. Betty the little is at work for you, but pray, my dear, do not employ her in that way again for 1 year at least. All her improvements sink in drawing, and then I shall never have service from her, and make too fine a lady of her, for so much is said on that occasion that it rather puffs up. I'm struck by the extraordinary scope of Elizabeth Ratcliffe's visual imagination. Amateurism was no disengaged, old-fashioned backwater. It was at the very cutting edge of the tastes and preoccupations of the age.
Female handicrafts are ancient. The Bible urged women to use their needles to beautify the home. But the 18th century was the first time manufacturers and retailers spotted a fertile market for the taking. And just like today, with a neat box of watercolours or a craft kit, almost anyone with time and spare cash could have a go.
I've always been fascinated by this weird and wonderful set of interlocking boxes which have been kept in the store here at the Museum of London. It's probably from the 1790s. It's a bit of a TARDIS of femininity. On the top here, a really exquisite piece of embroidery in chenille. And then you go down through the layers of the box. This layer is celebrating featherwork. What women do is take the feathers of one bird and reapply them to create images of others. And then into the next box, this lot have been stuck with artificial ivy leaves. In the corners, we have this sort of chiffon work. And then the final box, here, this is cut spangles, which can be bought in leaves, and then you cut it out for yourself and make your pattern and then sew it on. And then sequin spangles, rather like sequins you might still buy today. Cumulatively, I'm amazed by the testimony these shrimp pink boxes once gave to the diversity, the fertility and the ingenuity of female crafts.
However, public opinion considered a woman's arts and crafts to be for private viewing by friends and family only. They were certainly not to be seen by the general public or sold for money. The world of professional art was still clearly male. And that's what made the opening of the Royal Academy of Arts in London in 1768 such an apparent step forward for women. For the first time, the full range of female creativity was to be displayed and celebrated.
The Academy had 3 goals: to put on shows of contemporary art, to protect the professional interests of its members, and thirdly, to offer training. Perhaps the moment for female artists had finally come.
But in the stores of the Academy is this famous engraving of its founders. The male members gathered for a life drawing class still look to me just like a boys' own club. 32 men, 2 women.
The 2 founding female members, Mary Moser and Angelica Kauffman, they're only here as portraits, not people, sidelined. The engraving epitomises ambivalent attitudes to female artists in the period. Able to work, but denied equality. Subject to a different and altogether more demanding set of rules.
Initially, the Academy made an open call for art to show at its annual exhibitions. And that did include women's crafts. But within just 1 year, the type of art that women practiced to perfection posed a threat to the prestige of the fledgling institution.
I've got here the minutes of the members of the Academy for the 9th of April 1770. There's clearly been some internal argy-bargy. Resolved that no needlework, artificial flowers, cut paper, shell work, or any such baubles shall be admitted into the exhibition. What the Royal Academy is doing there in 1770 is institutionalising the boundary between professional and amateur, drawing a sharp line between the largely male world of painting, sculpture and architecture and the overwhelmingly female world of applied art and craft.
The Royal Academy's ruling was not a perverse exception. They were reinforcing age-old prejudices. In the hierarchy of art, sculpture and paintings depicting epic events were at the top, needlework at the very bottom. And philosophers like Rousseau knew which category women should confine themselves to. At no cost would I want them to learn landscape, even less the human figure. Foliage, fruits, flowers and drapery is all they need to know to create their own embroidery pattern. So what of the only 2 female artist members? They were thriving. One, flower painter Mary Moser, had become a favourite of the Queen, provoking envy in the men when she won a lucrative commission to paint a garden room in the royal villa. The other, who would have an even greater impact, was a Swiss artist, already celebrated across Europe and now living in London, renowned for her talent, sweetness and charm. Her name was Angelica Kauffman.
Kauffman was so well known that she was seen to lend a bit of cachet and glamour to the new Royal Academy, and was even asked to paint 4 ceiling decorations for the Royal Academy Council Chamber, now here in the entrance hall, depicting invention, composition, colour and design.
Kauffman scrimped to establish her studio here in Golden Square in London in sufficient style to attract the posh for their portraits. When she was asked by England's premier artist, Sir Joshua Reynolds, to paint his portrait, her reputation seemed assured. But the very fact of her success attracted malicious whispers. Virtually every artist she associated with was rumoured to be in love with her, including the eminent Sir Joshua, fueling the suspicion that Angelica owed her career more to flirtation than to talent.
Given her prodigious celebrity, though, it's easy to overlook the sheer scale of the challenge she faced. To be truly acclaimed a great, she had to master history painting, the most prestigious genre. But here, she confronted her toughest obstacle. History painting was the most highly rated art in 18th century Europe. That's a classical, biblical or historical scene on a broad canvas. It was supposed to be founded on philosophical understanding and abstract thought, things women were believed incapable of. As a French critic scoffed, women's lively imaginations are like mirrors that reflect all and create nothing.
To achieve her ambition, Kaufmann not only had to overcome such prejudice, she had to find a way out of a catch-22. History paintings were packed with full-length figures in dynamic poses, often scantily clad. A convincing attempt required detailed knowledge of human anatomy, the training of which was something the Royal Academy had been specifically set up to provide, even offering lectures from surgeons. This painting shows the leading anatomist William Hunter lecturing artists. They are all male. Propriety barred women from the life drawing class. No 18th century lady could do what I'm doing, gazing at this naked man, never mind drawing him. What was Kaufmann to do? Her sketchbook shows how she tackled her modest ignorance of the male body.
This is some sort of Roman or Greek hero in his sandals and with a bit of a cape over his arm. His muscles are sharply delineated. He has, you know, the impressive pecs and also this muscle here that footballers like to show off in underwear adverts. But what's missing is the very thing that defines manhood. He's completely smooth in the loins, rather like Barbie's Ken. And in a nutshell, this demonstrates the problem that Angelica Kaufmann faces. If she can show that she understands the male body and male genitalia and has been caught copying it, then her reputation would be blown, smashed to smithereens. But on the other hand, without detailed, exact knowledge of the male body in movement, she would never, ever become a great history painter. She's damned if she did, and damned if she didn't.
Kaufmann was not prepared to risk her reputation and restricted herself to sketching sculptures, a poor second to flesh and blood bodies. But ingeniously, she managed to make a virtue of that necessity. Saltram House in Devon has a unique collection of history paintings which hold the key to how Kaufmann tried to overcome the obstacle of anatomy.
I'm standing in front of a wall of Kaufmann's history paintings. Here we have Penelope taking down the bow of Ulysses. And this painting epitomises one of her favourite strategies, which is focusing on the female heroines of classical and British myth. But when Kaufmann chose to depict men as men, she used what is, for me, one of her most ingenious strategies. I'm sure most male painters would have chosen to present Hector out on the battlefield, defending Troy. Instead, Kaufmann presents him saying farewell to the lovely Andromache, who's weeping. Don't leave me. Don't make me a widow. Don't make our son an orphan. Perhaps men wanted blood and guts in their history paintings, but ladies